Hello and welcome, I'm Tesfa. What will the immediate future hold for the sector as Ethiopia braces up to open its doors for tourists? And how about the communities that have always played host before COVID-19 jumped in? My guest today, Mark Chapman, is one of the very few people who have championed community-based tourism. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Tesfa.
I understand that you were doing very well before COVID stepped in, right? That would have been, March this year.
March this year, yeah. We were still had new people coming in, even into the very beginning of April. We had a few more people coming in, believing COVID wasn't going to become that serious. And then, of course, the whole thing imploded. Since then, we've had virtually zero tourists.
And they cut their trip short and went back home? Is that how it happened?
We had several people cut their trip short. A few people thought they might as well carry on because it wasn't going to be very nice when they got back home. But it was quite low season by that time anyway. By the time we had people dropping off, we didn't have that many clients left in country. But it was a very busy season. October 2019 through to January 2020 was the busiest season I think any of us tour operators have ever seen. And part of a sort of year-by-year growth that got interrupted by political events and things from time to time, but you could see the natural attractions of Ethiopia pulling in more and more tourists.
Oh, crowd is steady, right?
Yeah. Steady increase, but 20-30% increase year on year in a good year, overwhelms the capacity quite quickly. So we'd actually got to a point, I think, where busy places were overwhelmed. You couldn't get bookings at the major lodges unless you booked a year in advance. Flights were getting full. So somewhere like Axum, where there's very few hotels, was a major bottleneck for us. We just couldn't get tourists sometimes into the only two halfway good hotels in Axum, and there were no other alternatives. So it was becoming, it was exposing the frailties and the problems within the Ethiopian tourism.
Then when COVID, when it began striking really hard, it was a total economic collapse as far as tourism is concerned, right?
Yeah, just dropped off the edge of the cliff. Went from significant number in March, April to zero. By the end of April, there were no tourists left, and we've had none since then, I think.
None, exactly, and for the foreseeable future too, at least for the next few months, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ethiopia's now.
We're going to talk about that anyway,
but it's no matter whether it opens or not, there's going to be very, very few tourists through to the end of 2020, and probably until 12 months from now, for a variety of reasons we can get into. Tourism's going to be a very slow recovery.
What does it mean to you, though? I mean, Tesfa Tours was established when?
In 2010.
But for 10 years before that, you've basically been doing this, right? Guided tours and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But as of 2010, you incorporated your company and started working as a real tour operator without ifs and buts.
Yes.
And, head on into all these lodges and all that stuff, right? Tell me about that, and we'll see how.
Going back to where I started in Ethiopia, 1997, I came here as a trailing spouse with the idea to develop some kind of community tourism. And it took me a few years to figure out where and so on. And I honed in on an area of Ethiopia just south of Lalibela called Mekhet Woreda. I had friends who were working in an amazing visionary development program that was multi-sectoral, and they said, we need to do off-farm income generation for farmers, and we think tourism's a great idea, so come and help us. So I went up there and walked around in the Woreda and found some absolutely beautiful places, fell in love with the people there as well. But it took a long, long time. The farmers were suspicious. They thought we were going to go and build an airport because it was flat, or we were going to build some telecommunications place or a dairy. And it was only when we'd started constructing some tukals with them, and then there were problems with the NGO between them and their head office, and it stopped working, and we left for about a year. We didn't come back. And they kind of then realized, these are ours, these tukals are ours. We came back, they were keeping sheep in them. And they said, no, we really want to do this. So we came back having set up a small NGO called Tesfa, Tourism in Ethiopia for Sustainable Future Alternatives, under the wing of Save the Children. And we started, making it work again. We got the first tourists through who absolutely loved the experience, staying with local villagers, paying them, a high proportion of the money, and then trekking through the local landscape. And through those next years, from 2003 to 2007, we gradually increased the number of guest houses, each community running it as a cooperative.
That's in North Wollo, right?
North Wollo, yeah. Mekhet Woreda was our initial place. The Woreda
still is, right? Yeah.
It's still a major place for us. It's been split. The Woreda has been split, and the Woreda boundaries have been divided. So the community tourism is now in several Woredas in North Wollo, but Mekhet is the main one. And you stay in these villages. As I say, they run it as a cooperative, so based around the infrastructure of the church, maybe around the IDR system would be a typical way we would find a group of people that said, hey, we're one community, and empower them and animate them and help them understand what tourism is, and train several of the women to prepare food. Some of the guys there would take donkeys to carry the tourist luggage, and we trained guides in Lalibela, distinct from the guides that worked in the church. We have a group of guides in Lalibela that work on this community tourism. So it's kind of gone from strength to strength over those years. And in 2010, as you said, I set up Tesfa Tours. To try and take it into the private sector, because it really needed to jump from being run out of public funds to being run out of to be funded through its own the profit to pay for the
as it should be,
to pay for the marketing and the booking service and everything, as it should be, to be a sustainable enterprise.
And then from North Wollo you also expanded to Afwasha and to Janamora, and also to eastern part of Tigray, basically in community tourism.
Yeah.
So the need came right after you started with that project in North Wollo, right?
But North Wollo was so successful, and people heard about it. So there were people working in Adigrat that said, "Hey, we want you to do some community tourism here."
Also, you were invited by the locals to be able to start this.
Yeah, and then the same sort of thing happened in Wofwasha, in this forest near Ankober on the Rift Valley Escarpment.
That was absolutely...
It's beautiful, but the forest is, poachers, as they term it, come in and cut down wood, because the tree is more valuable dead than alive, as we all know. So this NGO, Sinama, was trying to split up the forest into community cooperatives, so that each community could get sustainable income from the forest to make it valuable as a living forest rather than as dead timber. And so tourism was an obvious component of that. So we've got 4 lodges in that forest. And then in the Simians, there was the same kind of idea to try and create income opportunities for farmers outside of the park, to try and create a bit more balance.
But it didn't work, did it?
Well, it needs more. It needs a lot more. I mean, there's a lack of planning and follow through. There are some plans, but it's not followed through properly, and a lack of conservation in the park. But working with several organisations, we developed these guest houses on the south side of the park, so that we can try and create some kind of attraction there. But it needs a lot more. If it's really going to make a huge impact on the park, we need to look at developing, a lot more facilities outside the park, because the whole Simian Massif area is beautiful. The park, of course, is stunning in itself, but we need to really focus on conservation of the biodiversity and the vegetation inside the park, and giving farmers income from tourism in the boundary area is really an important part of doing that. So we've taken a first step, but not something we can do alone. We really need more support.
So trekking is an important catalyst here, right? And that's what you basically developed as an important input, if you will, the whole course of
I've always loved getting out and walking in wild places. And when I first came to Ethiopia as a backpacker even longer ago, I just fell in love with the country because it's with the relatively high altitude, you can be walking between 2,500 and 4,000 meters of altitude. You don't have all of the problems with tsetse fly and malaria that you'd have in other African countries. You have stunning views. It's cool at night, so which is for people from the Northern Hemisphere, it makes it a really pleasant climate to walk in. But yet blue skies in what is a European winter, so people absolutely love it. If they like walking outdoors, this country has great opportunities for them.
That was a very interesting personal experience, the way, how you came to love outdoor Ethiopia, if you will.
Yeah.
Is that why people from the West love coming to visit the wilderness here in Ethiopia? What do they basically look for when they decide to travel to countries like Ethiopia from?
Well, I think there's a whole mix here in Ethiopia, and different people take different parts of it. So you have beautiful trekking is one thing, but you have these villages, farming communities, living in a way that harks back to how our ancestors in Europe would have lived. Huts with wattle and daub, mud and straw, and livestock out on a common area, ploughing with an oxen, going to markets, market days and church saints' days rule their lives. I mean, that's how the pattern of their life is about. It's Saturday market here, it's it's Mariam at this church, it's Gabriel at this church. So that and the fasting seasons and the ploughing seasons, it's all one connected entity. And I think that there's a real link with how lives were lived back in Europe. And in the time since then, we've lost so much in our modern world. How long can you stand and greet somebody for? In cities doesn't happen at all. In the countryside, it still happens in the UK. But here in Ethiopia, how are your cows? How's the family? And the greetings are wonderful and long. People have time with each other. So there's a whole range of things going on. And our tourists just love that experience of being in a community that's really grounded, that's roots are in the soil and the church, and the hospitality is also. These people have materially nothing much. You go into their hut, their house, and the plough is there, and the tools are there, and they'll have a mirror and a comb, and their possessions could be loaded on a horse and taken away.
I mean, these are not backpackers like you were in the years past.
No.
These are not people with modest or meager income. These are people also with substantial amount of money who just want to experience rural Ethiopia. Is that what it is?
Yeah, we've had directors of major banks. We've had ambassadors, and successful business people coming out. And I think many of them feel inspired. One or two have given donations many years after they visited. They supported a grinding mill or something in some community. So it really touches people's hearts. The hospitality, the generosity of the farmers. You walk through the field and they'll come with a handful, not just one or two stalks, but a handful of bakela, of beans to give them to eat. When you know perfectly well that they won't have enough, shirowat and nanjara later in the year, and yet they're giving what they have now, they freely, happily give. It makes our clients very emotional, makes it very special for anybody travelling through there. And I think it's all of these put together that make this trip, these treks special.
So are your clients in a way special?
I don't think our the kind of people we appeal to is for everybody. It's a niche market, and it's definitely growing as we see more people becoming vegetarian to save the planet, more people caring about the rest of the world. There is a growing demand for responsible tourism,
caring about the environment, nature, and all that.
I think that's. That we started riding a wave, if you like, as that sector of tourism, the kind of ecotourism idea was expanding, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I think post-COVID, it will be even more important to a bigger number of clients that tourism is sustainable. And when they see that they're spending this money, they want to know that a good part of that money is going back into local people. So this community tourism sees, 55% going to the communities, 25% going to the guides, and we take 20%
as a business.
As a business.
So goes to the community in what way? I mean, of course, you've trained guides, and they rent mules, or they host, prepare food and stuff like that. How?
Well, they run the business themselves, the community. So Makwat Mariam was our first community in Mekit, and there were 300 odd households around the church there that formed the Deber and the Ider there. And so they get their income. They agree the salaries of the people that work there. So they've got guards guarding the compound, the cooks and cleaners that clean and look after the tourists, a camp manager, and what we call local guides, but really the donkey drivers. So those are the main people. And they get paid a salary. We're always, or a wage rather, we're always trying to get them to put it higher because it's often set too low.
Is that the monthly wage?
No, sorry, it is a wage. It's a wage based on when they work. So the women will get paid for 2 days when tourists come. And the donkey drivers get paid per day for they go and pick the tourists up at a location, put the luggage on, bring them back to the guest house, and then the next day take them to a halfway point where the other community meet them. So for that they'll get paid, and donkey rent and everything. So that's all covered by the community, and then we pay the community. It's actually 48% of the money goes to cover the host community, and then another 7% covers the provision of lunch, which is sometimes another community. It just depends on the specific location. But we have some places where they provide lunch on the trek, and so they'll get a payment for that as well.
Do bureaucrats understand this, what you're doing?
Not very often. I don't think there's very many that do. There's a few that have passed through, but there's always a change in personnel. So we don't have very many people in the culture and tourism offices around the country that know what's going on. Other than that, at Warada level, they're Mekit Warada, they really know how important this is because
it has brought.
It's put them on the map for tourism. They've got one famous church, but nobody really goes there. So for Mekit, this was a big thing. So we often have meetings with the Warada office there, and they're very supportive.
But I'm talking about at a higher level, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism level. I mean, this is something that, as you said earlier, would be very important to consider as we move on to the post-COVID era.
Yeah, no, it's not really understood at that level, at ministerial level at all, or at the Culture and Tourism Ministry. I don't think there's anybody that really knows what we're doing.
So, I mean, which means since March or April this year, it would have been, 5 months? For 5 months, none of these communities have seen you visiting them, right?
Yeah, tragically.
Not a single tourist?
Yeah.
Dropping by?
No, they haven't had any tourists coming by at all.
What does it mean? I mean, it makes some economic...
Yeah, for some of the communities, they haven't become that dependent on the tourism yet, but some of them have. There's some of the guest houses where they've given the job of cooking and preparing the food and cleaning to women who have lost their husbands or something like that, who really need that job. So the income has become really important to some members of the communities, and they still have to pay the guard's salary. So I'm going to need to, in the coming weeks, now we've hit the new year, send out some money to each of the communities to help them pay, or at least those that haven't got enough money saved up to pay for their guards. Otherwise, that creates a big problem. If the guards don't guard the infrastructure, then bad things can happen.
Right, right. So are you excited about October the 1st? As rumor has it that they're going to kickstart, they're going to open up, right?
Well, I'm relieved.
Resume work in the sector.
Yeah, I'm relieved. It's a vital first step. We have to officially open the country. And although it's been a bit haphazard how it's been communicated, whether there will be what the quarantine regulations are going to be in October, and how tourism can proceed, there is some kind of idea of how we're going to have to operate.
Protocol still.
There's a draft protocol out there, which is gives us something to work with, which is a good start. But we're only going to get. I've got possibly 2 clients coming at the end of the first week in October, who are, they called me the other day. They can't get insurance, so I've helped put them in touch with insurance companies that will insure them. But they're lovely people. They're really determined. They want to come out here despite COVID. But that's only going to be a few people out of the hundreds or thousands that would have come otherwise.
When do you think it will pick up? Not until next year.
We could see a gradual increase through October, November, December, January. A lot will depend on how COVID plays out in Europe, but the numbers are going to be tiny. We're not going to see the numbers this year come anywhere near last season's numbers. So possibly September 2021, we can get a good recovery, which will depend. One assumes COVID will be handled by then, whether it's vaccines or whether the virus has become so much less dangerous that people accept it. But the economic fallout from this is still uncharted territory. We don't know if people will have money in their pockets to spend on tourism. Certainly a good number won't. So I don't expect a full recovery even in 2021.
But there is domestic tourism. Can that be something that we have to deal with as soon as possible?
Well, Tesfa, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it's been lacking, sadly lacking. I think in the whole tourism industry, we haven't reached out enough to the domestic market. But since the time I've been living here, the number of Ethiopians diaspora that have returned, along with the number of Ethiopians who would travel to other countries but perhaps haven't really seen their own country, this is a fantastic opportunity, because travel abroad is difficult, but travel in Ethiopia is going to be easy for them, and there's a lot less other tourists there. So typically the last 2 weeks in October, everywhere is booked out. But this year, it's a beautiful time. The fields of grain are bright green. There's still flowers, mescal flowers around. The sun's shining. It's a wonderful time to visit the north of Ethiopia. So if we can get the domestic market to start, I think we could look at it as a kind of travel out to help out. The UK had this eat out to help out.
Very important.
Keep the hospitality industry going by going and eating out. If we can do the same kind of thing in Ethiopia and try and persuade people to come out and visit Gondar and Lalibela and the Simians and all the other destinations, there are tour guides that haven't worked for 6 months. There's families depending on the guides and the cooks and the drivers and the people working in the hotels. All of these people need a livelihood. So
how can you persuade people to travel?
Well, we need to see something from Ethiopian Airlines about how safe they're going to make it to travel, to make sure there aren't bottlenecks when you arrive in local airports, and there's not big queues which make people feel uncomfortable.
But Ethiopians need to be encouraged to visit their own country, right? How would you make that possible? How would you persuade Ethiopians to travel in country? Is there any...
Help Out to Eat Out was a government-promoted idea in the UK. So I would love to see the government here, the Ministry of Tourism and Ethiopian Tourism and all the other players come together and say, okay, let's put out some adverts on the Ethiopian media. Let's try and promote Ethiopia as a destination to Ethiopians. Come and rediscover your origins. It seems fairly obvious when you start talking about it, and the message is very clear, and I think it could be very well received. I'm sure, as you know,
it could also be cheaper, right, for them to travel now?
Yeah, it's much cheaper. Hotels are desperate just to get the machinery moving again, to get people coming through, and they don't need to be charging full rates. The same with guides, and again, with a little bit of encouragement from the ministry. Special rates could be offered during this time to, create a win-win situation. At least the guides are working, at least the drivers are driving, and hotels are partially, getting some business through. And then, the Ethiopia residents here in Ethiopia can go and explore their country.
Well, shouldn't the Ethiopian Tourism Council also take the lead, because this should be the best time for a multi-sectoral intervention in terms of bringing Ethiopian tourism where it belongs. And the Ethiopian Tourism Council, when was it the last time they met? Well over a year ago.
Definitely. It hasn't really been active for a long time. I think it's a brilliant idea, and we need this. Ethiopian Airlines sitting alongside all the various ministerial players and sectors, so that we can try and get tourism going. It's not something tour operators can do by themselves, and the Ministry of Tourism really needs to work with the other sectors. So it's absolutely essential to get this Tourism Council around a table again and looking at issues of how to get tourism going and how to support the sector. There's a lot of problems keeping the sector together in the coming months.
Well, I hope they do that. Thank you very much indeed. It was really a pleasure having you on my show, Mark Chapman. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tavara. It's been a pleasure for me too.